the fact that we have this beginning, right? This story that the Torah begins with of Adam eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's where we begin. Okay, that's where we begin. We have this pure state of the Garden of Eden to remember. 1 minute, we're trying to get back there. We're trying to get back there through a different route. And that's the route that we learn about in this parasha, in the struggle of Yaakov Avinu. Who was Yaakov Avinu? As soon as he's born, what does the Torah say about him? For Yaakov ish, what's the word?
Tam.
Tam. What does tam mean? It doesn't mean the never only, it means something else. What is a tam? Tam means innocent. Innocent. Yaakov was innocent. What was Esav?
Tzayad.
He was a tzayad. What is a tzayad?
He's a man of action.
What is a tzayad in English?
He's a hunter.
A hunter. What does a hunter need to be? Cunning, sophisticated, right? He has to know how to hunt. He's a snake. Okay? He's a snake. Esav was the snake. He was the cunning. Yaakov goes back to Adam HaRishon. Yaakov is an ish tam. Suddenly, we have in the Torah a character, a figure, who goes back to Gan Eden. The Gemara says this in a way of a hint. The Gemara says that the beauty of Yaakov Avinu was like the beauty of Adam HaRishon. That's what the Gemara says. Amazing. The Gemara mentions a third person, Rabbi Yehoshua. Apparently, Rabbi Yehoshua, who was an Amora, he lived much later, in 3rd century CE. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan's beauty was akin, similar to Yaakov Avinu, and Yaakov Avinu was like Adam HaRishon. Meaning Yaakov Avinu had that. He was a Yoshev Echanim. He was an indoor guy. Sat indoors, innocent. I mean, no wonder his mother loved him, right? Women especially appreciate this trust, right? This trust, this innocence, this total relationship. And Yitzchak was the man. He loved Esav. Why? Because Esav kitzai Pfeffer. Because Esav was the hunter. Esav had the tools. He had the cunning. He had the ability to manage in life. Okay, he was the shark, right? He did well. That was Esav. This was Yaakov and Esav. Ultimately, what happened? Ultimately, Esav was pushed out of the picture. Okay? It's a different story. And Yaakov Avinu had to go through some tough stuff. We spoke about this on Shabbat, about Yaakov Avinu building his family in the house of Lavan to encounter deception faced on the arch snake, Lavan, right? And he had to encounter this and to somehow maneuver and navigate and still bring up a family. And then he has this encounter with this figure, this malach. Rashi says this malach is the genius of Esav, right? The sire, this minister, this angel of Esav. Whoever it was. Yaakov Avinu encounters him and has to fight with him. He has to struggle with him. What does he learn from him? Why do angels come to fight with us? I mean, do they? Not generally. We don't usually find angels coming down and picking a fight. In fact, this is the only place in the Torah that such a thing happens. So, why did it happen? And what were they fighting about? You know, what was it about? Like, what's going on over here? I mean, clearly this angel was sent to teach Yaakov a lesson. He was teaching him a lesson. What was the lesson? The lesson was, Yaakov, you're going to have to fight. You're going to have to struggle. You're not going to be able to go back to being an ishtam, to being innocent. That's not your calling. The calling of the Jewish people is not to be innocent. Because that's a world that was lost. And we have a calling in this world in our human reality, not in some virtual reality. Our calling is here, in a world that's filled with good and with evil, in a world that's filled with suspicion, in a world that's filled with a lot of unpleasantness, which is part of our reality. And we don't have the privilege of being in a safe space. We do not. We have to be out there in the world, in the struggle. This was the first basic lesson that this Malach taught Yaakov Avinu. You have to fight. It's always going to surround you. You'll never be able to say, oh, now I've reached my utopia. There is no utopia. We have to struggle. There's another lesson. Like there's another two lessons. Second lesson is that you'll win. You'll prevail in the morning. What happens in the morning, right? Let's go back to page 3. Right? Right in the second verse, it's verse 26. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, this angel, this figure, was unable to defeat Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov wins. Yaakov wins. So, one very important lesson is that we have to fight. We're in a struggle. The second lesson is we're going to win. That's a big deal. Yaakov Avinu knows that he has to fight, but he knows that he's going to win. But there's also a third lesson. Third lesson is he's going to get injured. Okay? He gets wounded, right? This figure, he wrenched Jacob's hip. He dislocates the hip, or something happens there. Right? Take a kaf yerach Yaakov, like a dislocated hip. And that's why we don't eat the Kiddush. We'll get to that in a minute. But that's the third lesson. He's going to be wounded. So number one, there's a struggle. Number two, we win. Number three, it's not so simple. But now that Yaakov knows he's going to win, so he doesn't need to divide his camps anymore. Dividing the camp is a strategy that you need to use because maybe you're going to lose. If you're going to lose, then cut your losses. A half. The other half can escape. That's a strategy when there's a chance of losing. But after this message, Yaakov knows he's not going to lose. So now he can bring everyone together. He might get wounded. And that's why, he puts first the children of the Shachot, and then Leah's children, Achron, Chavit. He puts his most beloved at the end because he might get wounded and he doesn't know where that might happen. Okay, so he's still cautious, but he's not going to lose. Dividing the camp is a strategy when you think, I might lose this. So he doesn't do that anymore because now he knows he's going to win, but he knows he might get wounded. Now, till today, we have a prohibition against eating the Gid Hanashem. Okay, this is kashrus issues because the hindquarters are very, very tasty. It's good meat. What's it called? The meat from the hindquarters, it's a type of steak. Yes, filet mignon, thank you. That's a filet mignon. You don't know that.
No, I didn't know that.
Yes, it is. That's correct. It's like a speciality.
It's a Lena's part.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. But it needs a special process of hechsher. The Ashkenazi hechsherim actually don't do it. Although they used to, like 100 years ago, but then they stopped. Nowadays it's only the Sephardic hechsherim that.
Why is it? Because it's too difficult to do?
And they're like afraid that we lost tradition, we don't know how to do it. But the Sephardim are not worried. They say, no, we have a tradition, we're okay.
Bet yourself, right?
Yes, bet yourself, correct. Another Sephardi advantage, there are many. Add it to the list.
Can you convert it?
So till today there's a prohibition. Now, I mentioned over here the Sefer Achinuch. He says, why don't we eat the sciatic nerve? That's what it's called, the Git Hanoshe. Why don't we eat it? So he says, well, look at number 2. This is on page, what is this, page 7 or something? Page 8, the last page.
It's the last one.
Yeah, the last page that has anything written on.
Oh, that's right.
So, look at where it says number 2. So he says, you know what, you guys read it, but let me tell you what he says. He says, it's to remind us that even though things are tough, in the end, we'll be okay. Just like Yaakov Avinu. Things were tough, but in the end, he was okay. But, you know what? I have a problem with this interpretation. First of all, if I want to remember that everything's going to be okay, will I do that through not eating the Git Hanoshe? The Git Hanoshe reminds us that Yaakov Avinu was wounded. Like, is that the way to celebrate that Yaakov Avinu was okay? It seems to me a little bit strange that we remind ourselves of how things will be good. How will we remind ourselves of this? By not eating this Git Hanoshe. It seems to me a little bit strange, that's one thing. The other thing is, Yaakov Avinu, to be honest, he was always going to be okay because the angel didn't really want to kill him. The angel was sent to give him this message. So, okay, he was okay. And the Chinuch says, the source says, we see with our forefather that he was saved from this guardian angel of Esau that wanted to eliminate him from the world. I don't know, he didn't really want to eliminate him. He was sent to give him this message. So I would suggest, obviously humbly, I would suggest that the Git Hanoshe, that we don't eat this sciatic nerve, this reminds us that we are still in a struggle. We can't be so innocent. We can't take the whole cow and just eat the whole thing. No. There's something there that we can't do. There's something there within all this goodness, within the bounty, within the blessing that Hashem gives us in the world. There's a lot of goodness in the world. But you know what? There's also some stuff which is really not good. There's also some evil there. And there's also some things that we need to be suspicious of, that we need to know how to maneuver with. We need to realize that there's a struggle going on. Sometimes when things are good, we like to forget this and to think, things are good. And thank God, they are. But then, if you forget that there's other stuff going on in the world, then you can get a knockout punch from nowhere and you're not ready. It's dangerous. And I mean that physically, but not just physically. I mean that spiritually. I mean that, we need to have a spiritual guard. We need to have an awareness that, people say, when I was a kid, I had all these temptations. Now I'm old, I don't have these temptations. Please, we're human beings. There are many aspects to our personality. Temptations come from everywhere. And it's not always the same. There's a lot of different stuff that the world hurls at us from all kinds of different angles. But we need to be aware that there's a struggle going on, a struggle for growth. The Vilna Gaon says, it's so wonderful, it's so true. The Vilna Gaon says that the Pasuk in Mishlei, in Proverbs, Pasuk in Mishlei in Proverbs says as follows. It says, Orach Chaim, a way of life. the way of life, is lemala, is up. Lemaskil. What's a maskil? Somebody who understands. Somebody who understands, for him, the way of life is up. Okay? Like a song, right? But anyways, right? The way of life goes up. Why? Says the passage. You know why? Leman sur mishol mata. To prevent yourself from descending down. If you don't want to go down, you have to keep going up. Says the Vilna Gaon, he says there's no neutral in a human condition. You just cannot say, okay, now I'm cool. I'm putting myself in neutral. You know, sometimes you enjoy it. You know, you're in your car, you're cruising, so you go downhill. Put yourself in neutral, you know. I don't need to waste gas. You know, I'm just cruising. There's no neutral. You have to keep climbing. Because if you don't, then you automatically fall. Because the struggle is always there. It never leaves us. And this is the lesson of Yaakov, and it's a lesson for the Jewish people. Listen, it's true on a personal level. Okay? And yet, we are all individuals. Right? We are all individuals. Each of us has his or her individual struggles in everything, but I think most of all and again, I can only speak for myself, in relationships. Relationships, you know, there's nothing that takes more energy than a negative relationship. When you have a relationship, it could be with a sibling or a parent or a child or a spouse, or with a friend or with an old friend or I don't know what. When you have a damaged relationship, it sucks the energy out of you, and it can be terrible. And we need to take the responsibility of investing in relationships and thinking, you know, what is it with me? What is it with the relationship? How can we try to make it better? Or some of us find ourselves stuck in life somewhere. You know, this can be on micro level, macro level. Like, you know, you want to move forward, but you feel you're just stuck. And so how do you get out of it? And it takes a lot of work, and it's a struggle. It's not easy. And with so many other things also, whether it's in study or in work or I don't know, there's so many. Life is multifaceted, okay? But I want to say also though that it's not just individual. Okay, the Torah doesn't speak about it. Sometimes does, but generally the Torah, the story of the Torah, okay, the narrative that the Torah tells, is a national narrative. And the same idea that we're learning here, the same idea that the Vilna Gaon says that you have to go up, otherwise you go down, same idea of trust, of being able to, because listen, how do we go back to the garden, right? The door's locked. So the answer is, yeah, we struggle through the world. But what are we doing in this struggle? We're struggling to be able to find that trust that you have as a child, but to find it even in a sophisticated world where you cannot be naive, it's really complicated. You know, the Torah asks us to trust Hashem. How can we really trust Hashem in a world that's so complicated? On Shabbat, Rabbi Benjamin said this story from, who was it? Corey, right? One day he witnessed, you know, the rabbi and the rebbetzin of the shul, they died in a fire on Shabbat, and he was like unable to put his tefillin on. He said, like, where's God in this? What's going on with God? It's really complicated world. It's not simple. And then we have to find the strength to trust God. I mean, yes, but that's Yaakov Avinu in the struggle. You know what? It says, look, let's go back to page 4 for a second. This is so powerful. The fourth page, this is it the fourth page? 1, 2. 3, sorry, the third page. Okay, Genesis 32. Okay, in the last verse, 29, do you have it? 32:29. Okay, said this angel, your name shall be no longer Jacob, but Israel. Here we are, Israel. Right? Why? For you have striven, you've struggled with being divine, with Elohim, God, and human, and you've prevailed. So there's two struggles. Okay? Hisarita, you've struggled in Elohim, with God, as it were, and with Anashim, and with men. Which one is the main struggle? The one with God or the one with men? What's the main struggle? And how do we know? I think we know from this passage, from the name Yisrael. Why is he called Israel? Because of this struggle. Yisra is the struggle, Hisarita, struggle. And how does it finish? El, what's El?
God.
The God. Meaning Israel is named after struggling with God. Right? We struggle with God. It's amazing. Meaning our life is about struggling with God. To have this trust, to find the trust in Hashem, to go back to Gan Eden, but not being in Gan Eden, not being in this place of innocence and purity and everything is just perfect. No, we're in a complicated and sophisticated and filled with good and evil world. And here, to have that struggle and to find the trust in Hashem, in our world, that's going back the hard way. That's not just walking back into Gan Eden, right? That's going back the hard way. But that's our job. That's our job, personally. There's one place, I'll just mention, there's one, maybe I mentioned it before in one of the shirim, I don't remember. There's one place in all of the brachas, every bracha, all of the brachas, there's only one place where we mention Gan Eden. Only one. Under the chuppah.
I remember you told us.
I said this once. It's so good because under the chuppah we can find this trust. We can't do this every day. We don't have that. We can't touch that pureness, that elevation, that total relationship, that absolute trust. But you're under the chuppah, there you can touch it. In a marriage, there you can touch it. The only place where we say this, where we mention, what do we say under the chuppah? We say, Sameach Tesamach Reim Ahuvim Hashem, make them happy. Like you made Adam and Eve happy in Gan Eden. They could be happy because they had this total innocence, this total relationship under the chuppah. Under the chuppah. But you know what? So for us this is a struggle, okay? Both with trusting God, which is difficult. And you have good days and bad days. Yes, let's not pretend that we're always, we trust Hashem. We have our bad days. And that's life, and that's Yaakov Avinu. Kisarisa, you've got to struggle. If all the days are good, then it's Gan Eden. But we're not in Gan Eden. We struggle. And we struggle in our relationships, but we have to work. Don't just say, okay, so I gave up, right? But it's also true on a national level, right? On a Jewish people level. First of all, among the Jewish people. So many different groups, you know? You have the Breslov and the Chabad, and the Charedim, and the modern Orthodox, and the religious Zionists, and the Masorti, the traditional, and the secular, and everyone. You have this great, you know, how to describe it, right?
What's that?
Yes, this crazy variety of Jews, each one with his belonging, each one with his territory, right? But we need to be able to get on with each other, right? We need to work, to struggle, to have this trust, right? To be able to function together in a way that can bring us to the next level. we have to be able to foster this. And it requires work, it requires sacrifice, it requires sometimes being able to reach a compromise. You don't get all that you want. It's not easy, right? It's a struggle. We need that. You have to learn the other one's language, otherwise how can you really build confidence and trust? And so some of my work in Israel among the Haredim, but there's a lot of work in so many of these groups, but it's also a mission of the Jews to the world. I mean, that's our mission, right? We have a mission. Today we even have a state. It's really amazing, right? It makes the mission that much more concrete, right? It's more, when we were just scattered everywhere, so you say, all right, we're just trying to survive. Let us try to live. We're in survival mode. It's all emergency mode. And today we're beginning to leave that emergency mode. Well, that's a big responsibility. It means we have to kind of teach the world how to trust. Teach the world to trust in God. Teach the world to trust in each other. Don't forget, loving your fellow as yourself, that's a klal gadol b'Torah. It doesn't mean just airy-fairy stuff. It means that to be able to have these relationships that are true and that are really trusting, that's part of being godly, right? Because that's the trust that we have with God. And if your religion is a religion of trust, then you can trust other people too. But that's an environment that we need to create. That's an atmosphere we need to foster and to struggle with in a world that we know is filled with suspicion and good and evil. It's not simple. Nothing here is simple. But this is the struggle of Yaakov Avinu. This is what takes us back, the hard way if you want, to the Garden of Eden. And this is very much the mission of the Jewish people. And this is why we're called Yisrael. Because we struggle, and we struggle with God, but we find Him. And we're loyal to Him. And we know that in the end we're going to win. But we're going to win because of good people, like the people here, who are a part of doing the job, doing the work. And that's how we get to where we need to get to. Without this month, we're going to have Hanukkah. How do we get to Hanukkah? Because of good people who fought difficult battles and managed to win. And they were fighting the wars of God. So we need a people to do that. This doesn't happen by itself. Right? So we are all the disciples of the Hasmoneans, of the Chashmoneim. We're carrying on that struggle. And just like they managed to set up their little independent sovereignty, so we have ours. It's good. But much more work to be done. Thank you. But I wanted to talk about briefly. Sure, yeah. I was waiting for these questions. Why these questions? Yes.
So last week, Rabbi told us that, the course of this class, we're going to talk about the struggles and the fighting between siblings, and we briefly touched on the fight. Nice. But I don't know why they were fighting. I know you briefly said that, like, the mom loved Jacob more and the dad loved the other one, but, like, why? What were they fighting about? Why was Jacob scared of her?
So Yaakov and Esau were fighting about the right to continue the lineage of Yitzchak. And they were not the only ones. Meaning we have Ishmael and Abraham and Yitzchak. Well, generally speaking, and today maybe you would say that both could do it, and you know what? Maybe they could. We don't know. But in the tradition, the way things always were, it's very interesting, by the way, to see the way that history developed. Today we don't think in these terms so much. But even in Halakha, even in Jewish law, the firstborn, he had this very special status. And that's what I think about Yetziat Mitzrayim, when we left Egypt, right? How did that happen? With Makat B'chorot, right? Striking the firstborns. Not to deal with the firstborns. Okay, so today, like, who cares? Who came out first? So what?
Well,
right?
They get the hard part.
Oh, they get the hard part, right? Poor guy, he came out first, right? He was a guinea pig, his parents did the trials on him, they practiced on him. I know, I'm the first one. Alright. But in the past, the firstborn, he was the one that actually carries on the family lineage. He's the one that carries it on. And it's fascinating in the Torah. The firstborn is the one that is supposed to carry it on. That's what happened everywhere in the culture. Now the Torah was talking to, and it never happened. It was always the second, right? Whether it was Yitzchak, Yitzchak was the firstborn to his mother, but not to Abraham. And in the case of Jacob, Jacob was born after Esau. And even in the case of the brothers, right, of right, Reuven and Yosef and Yehuda, right, ultimately, and Ephraim and Manasseh, right, ultimately it went to the second, right. Manasseh was the first, went to Ephraim, and so on. And this is a big topic in Sefer Bereshis. I leave your rabbi to speak about it, but this whole sibling rivalry of Bereshis, from the beginning, from Cain and Hevel, all the way to the end, it, as it were, dominates the stories of Bereshis. Probably I imagine maybe next week, Rabbi Benjamin will pick this up. But it's certainly a big deal. And you see it every time. It's a big deal.
Thank you.
More questions. Everything was so clear. Come on.
I don't know.
Oh, thank you all.
We'll probably have questions tomorrow.
All right, it's good. We'll at breakfast.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. Kyle, was that recorded?
Thank you so much.
Let's hope so. Thank you very much. It was really a real pleasure to have all of you